Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always excited to explore new ideas.
Well, today we're tackling something that honestly kind of blew my mind when I first came across it.
Oh, let's hear it.
It's about infallibility in the Baha'i faith. But here's the twist. It's not about blind obedience or anything like that.
Yeah, that's not really a Baha'i concept.
No, not at all. Our sources this time link infallibility to this idea of a frontier of learning, a space for experimentation, pushing boundaries, and get this, even making mistakes.
That's fascinating. It seems counterintuitive. You'd think infallibility means having all the answers, right?
Right. But these sources paint a different picture. We've got excerpts from letters written by the Universal House of Justice, some really insightful academic articles on Baha'i thought, and even personal reflections from Baha'is who are out there, actually doing the work, building community, trying new things.
So a really diverse range of perspectives.
Exactly. But it begs the question, how do we reconcile these seemingly opposite ideas? Infallibility and, well, the freedom to get things wrong.
Well, I think the first thing is to understand what we even mean by infallibility in this context.
Yeah, good point. It's easy to jump to conclusions.
Right. So in the Baha'i faith, it's not about the members of the Universal House of Justice being individually perfect or all-knowing.
So it's not like they're walking dictionaries of divine wisdom.
Nope, not at all. It's more about the institution itself, you see. It's divinely guided in its decision-making. And that guidance is meant to protect the unity and the progress of the Baha'i faith as a whole.
So it's about safeguarding the long-term vision, the overall direction.
Exactly. It's like, think of a ship's captain.
Oh, I like analogies.
They may not know every single detail of navigation, right? But they rely on instruments, charts, the expertise of the crew to guide the ship safely to its destination.
So the infallibility of the Universal House of Justice acts like that compass, ensuring the Baha'i community is always heading in the right direction, even if the waters get a little rough.
A perfect way to put it.
But then we have this other piece of the puzzle, the frontier of learning. And our sources are full of examples. Baha'is around the world are trying new approaches to teaching, different ways to build community. They're even pioneering social and economic development projects.
And all of that involves a certain degree of trial and error.
That's right. Experimentation is key.
And it's not just accepted, it's actually encouraged. The Baha'i writings emphasize that revelation didn't end with Baha'u'llah. So our understanding of his teachings needs to keep evolving, to adapt to a changing world. The frontier of learning is where that happens, where we apply those teachings in real-world situations.
That makes sense. We're not dealing with static dogma here.
No, not at all.
But here's what trips me up. If everyone's off experimenting, trying new things, how do we maintain unity as a global community? Doesn't all that trial and error risk, people pulling in different directions?
That's where the guidance of the Universal House of Justice comes in. It's like, yes, they encourage this frontier of learning at the grassroots, but at the same time, they provide a framework, a set of overarching goals and principles to make sure all those individual efforts contribute to a unified whole.
So it's like they're the architect designing the blueprint.
Yeah.
But they're leaving room for each community to, personalize their space within the overall structure.
I love that analogy. It's spot on. Think of the global plans that the Universal House of Justice issues. They outline the broad aims, the big priorities for the whole Baha'i world. But within those, communities have the freedom to adapt and innovate, tailor those goals to their specific circumstances. Okay,
so we're seeing this dynamic interplay. The infallible guidance of the Universal House of Justice provides the framework, the compass, if you will, while the experimental nature of learning at the grassroots allows for flexibility and adaptation.
Right, a constant balancing act.
But how does that actually play out on the ground? How does the Universal House of Justice guide this process without stifling that creativity and local initiative?
One way is by emphasizing core principles. Reading through these sources, you see certain themes pop up again and again. Things like the importance of consultation, the need for systematic learning, and above all, the constant striving for unity.
These principles act like guideposts. They ensure that even as communities are experimenting, they're doing so in a way that aligns with the spirit of the Baha'i teachings.
Exactly.
It's almost like setting up a lab, right? You want to encourage experimentation, but you also need some safety protocols in place.
Precisely. These principles are the safety protocols, so to speak, ensuring experimentation doesn't end up undermining the unity or integrity of the community.
I'm starting to get the picture. But there's one thing I'm still struggling with, the whole issue of mistakes. If the universal house of justice is infallible, shouldn't they be able to prevent those mistakes from happening in the first place?
That's where I think our conventional understanding of infallibility trips us up. We tend to view it as a kind of omniscience, like they should have perfect foresight and eliminate any possibility of error. But the Baha'i understanding is a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. How does the Baha'i faith view the role of mistakes, especially in the context of learning and growth?
Well, one thing that really struck me was how the Baha'i writings actually emphasize the importance of making mistakes as part of the learning process.
Really?
Yeah. There's this passage that says something like, progress is born of experience, and experience comes through the exercise of human volition, which inevitably involves making choices that may turn out to have been less than perfect.
So mistakes aren't something to be feared or avoided. They're actually a natural part of the journey.
Exactly. They're opportunities for growth. Opportunities to reflect and refine our understanding. And the infallibility of the universal house of justice doesn't negate that. Instead, it ensures that even when we stumble, the overall direction remains true to Baha'u'llah's vision.
It's like having a safety net. You're free to explore and push boundaries because, even if you fall, there's something there to catch you.
It's a beautiful way to describe it.
And it makes me think of another concept we've touched on, adaptive infallibility. You mentioned earlier that even the decisions of the universal house of justice aren't set in stone forever.
Right. As humanity evolves and as our understanding of the Baha'i teachings deepens, the universal house of justice can revisit and refine its pronouncements.
So they're not claiming to have a monopoly on truth.
No. They're part of this unfolding process of understanding, just like the rest of us.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have a question for you, our listener. What's been standing out for you so far? What new thoughts or questions has this conversation sparked for you?
Take a moment to reflect on that, and we'll pick this thread back up in part 2. We'll be exploring how this model of adaptive infallibility challenges our conventional assumptions about truth and authority. Welcome back. I'm curious, as we dig into this whole idea of adaptive infallibility, does it challenge how you usually think about truth and authority?
It definitely shakes things up. I mean, we're so used to thinking of truth as something absolute, right? Fixed and unchanging.
Yeah, that's the common view.
And authority figures, well, they're supposed to have all the answers. But this model, it suggests something way more fluid, more dynamic.
You hit the nail on the head.
Well,
One of our sources, an article by a Baha'i scholar, describes truth not as like a destination, but like a path, an ongoing process of discovery. And in that process, authority isn't about dictating answers, it's more about guiding the exploration.
It makes me think about how sometimes when we're searching for that certainty, we can get stuck clinging to fixed interpretations, like we're afraid to let go. But what you're saying is that this model actually encourages us to embrace the ambiguity, stay open to new understandings as our knowledge grows.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our understanding is always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
There's this beautiful quote from Baha'u'llah that keeps coming back to me as I'm reading these sources. The essence of true liberty is the submission of one's will to the will of God.
That's a powerful one.
It might seem paradoxical at first, but what I think it's getting at is that real freedom comes when we align ourselves with this constant process of discovery, this unfolding of truth.
So it's not about blindly following, it's about consciously choosing to be part of this collective learning journey.
Absolutely. And I think that's where this idea of adaptive infallibility becomes so vital. It gives us this assurance that even the highest authority in the Baha'i faith, the universal house of justice, is also part of this process. They're learning and growing too.
Because if their decisions can change, it means they're not claiming to be the ultimate source of truth, right? They're on this journey of understanding alongside the rest of the community.
Exactly. And that brings up another interesting point raised in one of our sources, a reflection by a Baha'i who has been involved in community building projects for years. They were writing about how this model fosters a sense of shared responsibility. It's not top-down, it's collaborative. Everyone has a part to play in advancing the faith.
So it's not about passively receiving guidance, but actively engaging with it, bringing your own insights to the table, knowing that you have something to contribute.
Precisely. And that's what makes this model so dynamic. It unleashes this creative energy within each individual, encouraging us to use our talents and perspectives to make the world a better place.
It strikes me that this approach is especially relevant now, with all the complex problems we're facing. Climate change, Social injustice, economic inequality, traditional models of authority just don't seem equipped to handle these things.
I agree. And one of our sources, a report from the Baha'i international community, actually addresses this head on. They argue that the world needs new models of governance, models based on collaboration, consultation, and a deep respect for the interconnectedness of everything.
So it's not just about tweaking the systems we have, it's about a fundamental shift in how we make decisions at every level.
Yes. And the report goes on to say how the Baha'i idea of adaptive infallibility offers some really valuable insights for this. It shows how you can have a system that provides clear guidance and direction while still allowing for flexibility and the integration of different viewpoints.
It's like navigating a ship through uncharted territory. You need a captain, someone to set the course, but you also need a crew that can adapt to the conditions and make adjustments when necessary.
I love that. It really captures the heart of what we've been talking about. Finding that balance between unity and diversity, guidance and freedom, stability and evolution.
And it seems like this has implications for how we approach our own individual growth too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If even the universal house of justice, this highest authority, is always learning and adapting, it means that none of us can afford to become complacent in our own understanding.
Right. We can't just settle for a fixed set of beliefs. We have to cultivate that open-mindedness, that willingness to challenge ourselves and consider new perspectives.
Yes. And this, I think, is the big takeaway from our deep dive today. It's not just about understanding a specific part of the Baha'i faith. It's about recognizing that this idea of adaptive infallibility has the potential to transform how we think, how we learn, and ultimately how we build a better world.
So as we move into the last part of our deep dive, I want to ask you, our listener, to consider this. How can this model inform your own approach to learning and growing? What does it mean for you to think of truths as this ongoing process of discovery?
We're going to explore these questions further in part 3, where we'll bring it all together and look at some of the practical applications of this model for all of us.
Back for the final part of our deep dive. It's been fascinating exploring how the Baha'i faith brings together infallibility and a frontier of learning. But how can we actually apply these ideas in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, right? How do we take something so institutional and translate it into personal growth?
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the theory, but what I really want to know is how this understanding can help us on our own learning journeys, our search for meaning and purpose and all that.
Well, one thing that really struck me is the importance of humility. You know, we've been talking about how the universal house of justice, even with this idea of adaptive infallibility, they're still learning and growing.
It is a powerful example.
It is. It reminds us that no matter how much we think we know, there's always more to learn. And it's not just about acquiring knowledge, but being open to having our perspectives challenged.
And being wrong sometimes.
Exactly. One of our sources uses this metaphor of a seed.
Oh, a seed.
Yeah. They talk about how our understanding of truth is like a seed that has the potential to grow, but it needs the right conditions, fertile soil, sunlight, water.
So our minds are like the soil. And we have to make sure that soil is ready to receive new insights.
Exactly. And that involves certain spiritual practices, certain qualities of character. Humility is definitely key, as we've discussed.
Of course.
But also, patience growth takes time.
And courage.
Oh, absolutely. The courage to let go of old ideas that no longer serve us.
To keep evolving.
Yes. And that brings us to another important principle we've touched on, consultation.
You mean that Bahá'í principle of seeking out advice and perspectives?
Exactly. It's not just an administrative thing, it's a way of life.
So actively seeking out different viewpoints, engaging in meaningful dialogue, even when those views challenge our own.
Yes. It's recognizing that none of us has all the answers. We all have a piece of the puzzle, and through conversation and sharing, we start to see the bigger picture.
That ties back to what we were talking about earlier, truth as a process, a journey we take together.
Exactly. And I think that understanding changes how we approach everything, our relationships, our communities, even our global interconnectedness. It calls for collaboration, for a willingness to learn from each other, to see the world through different lenses.
It's like instead of trying to force our own views on others, we step into this space of shared exploration.
Beautiful. And of course, that journey involves making mistakes. We've talked about the frontier of learning and how it embraces trial and error. Well, that applies to our individual lives as much as it does to the community.
So mistakes aren't something to be ashamed of. They're opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly. One of our sources, a collection of personal reflections from Baha'is all over the world, talks about this. They share stories of setbacks and failures, but they see those experiences as stepping stones on their path.
It's like they say, we learn more from our failures than our successes.
That's it. But it's not just about learning the lesson. It's about having the strength to get back up and keep going.
To be resilient.
Yes. And that resilience comes from trusting the process. Just as Baha'is trust in the guidance of the Universal House of Justice, even when they may not understand a particular decision, we can cultivate that same trust in our own lives.
So trusting that even when things get tough, even when we make mistakes, we're still being guided.
Exactly. Letting go of the need to control everything, to have all the answers. Instead, we surrender to the flow of life, trusting that there's a wisdom unfolding, even in the midst of our stumbles.
Such a powerful idea. That's really what this whole deep dive has been about, recognizing that learning is this lifelong adventure, a journey that pushes us beyond our comfort zones, our limited perspectives, into a world of possibilities.
And for me, what stands out is the invitation it offers, an invitation to approach life with humility, curiosity, and a commitment to keep learning and growing.
An invitation to embrace the paradox, to find unity in diversity, to trust in the unfolding, and to do our part in building a world where everyone can thrive.
It's been incredible exploring these concepts with you, and hopefully our listeners are walking away with some food for thought.
Definitely. We've delved deep into the Baha'i faith's perspective on infallibility and the frontier of learning, and it's given us all, I think, a new way to look at truth authority and the journey of personal growth.
Thank you for joining us.
And until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep growing.